you know, it's always kind of funny for me because for those that listen to my State of the City that I usually do in March, I always think, oh man, what am I going to talk about a couple of months later? And I always kind of forget just how busy the city is. And I think that I went back and kind of fast forwarded through some of the stuff that I talked about at the State of the City, because I don't really want to repeat myself too much, but I did want to provide some updates on some of the things that I did talk about, kind of bring everybody up to date. And so in no particular order, back in March we talked about Sam's Club. It was always one of the questions I got is when are they going to open, when are they going to open? Happy to say they opened up a week ago. And if you've not been to the new Sam's Club, very nice facility. My wife and I were in there shopping for a weekend family gathering we've got coming up Sunday yesterday. And great store, great merchandise, nice to have them here in town, and great addition. So nice to see them open up. The most frequently asked question, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it is the Phoenix Mart project. And I'm sure that if you've not been out on Florence Boulevard, you've probably heard the story. They are out working on the entry feature as we speak. We are expecting to see a building plan submittal from them first part of next week, and it's about a 2 million square foot building. And one of the challenges you always have with buildings that are not your norm is how do you make it work? And just as an example, people always ask, how come it's taken so long? And I give you the litany of reasons. It's big, it's complicated, has no infrastructure, interesting financing. But just one of the logistical problems they had is that we operate, like most cities, under a building code. And I will probably get the numbers wrong, but you'll understand the concept. The building is about 500 feet wide. And in the case of the fire code, you have to be within 150 feet of an exit. So 150 feet times 2, if you're standing in the middle of the building, is 300 feet. The building is big enough that the occupancy level is 22,000 people. So half the population of Casa Grande could fit in there. How do you get them out? And so the code provides what they call a performance-based design, and we've never done that in Casa Grande, so we've had to go out and hire an expert to help us. And we'll work through that issue, but you don't think of things like that when you think of this big project. You think, well, it's a big project, let's start and get going. That is one of 2,000 issues we've had with them going forward. And I think the fact that we're finally at a plan submittal stage, like I said, we're expecting it next week, is a great sign, because I think it just reinforces what we've been saying all along. They're coming, just be patient. I think many people have been really fixated on the Phoenix Mart building itself. And like I said, it's a little under 2 million square feet. And for perspective, when you leave here today, drive by the Walmart distribution center, that's about 800,000 square feet. So the Phoenix Mart building will be twice the size of Walmart DC. But there are also other components for Phoenix Mart that I think we've kind of lost sight of in the process. One of them is a hotel. If they're going to have all these people visiting the facility, and those of you that travel for business, the last thing you want to do, at least when I'm traveling for business, the last thing I want to do is have to drive 30 miles to get to where my job is going to be. So we need more hotels in town, and part of the first phase of the project for Phoenix Mart is a 100-room hotel that'll be located out on the entryway. That will be starting shortly after the Phoenix Mart project is started. We haven't seen the final design for the hotel yet, but we expect that the hotel will finish about the same time the Phoenix Mart project itself finishes. The third component that's already been approved is really it started out to be an apartment complex, and they've kind of changed the concept so it'll be a corporate village that will have retail space on the ground floor, living space for some of the corporate people that will have a presence in the Phoenix Mart, and some small meeting space set aside, and that's about another 200 units. That project also is expected to start within 6 months of the start of the Phoenix Mart building. So you'll end up with not just the Phoenix Mart building, but a hotel and this little condominium village all coming online at the same time. There have been a lot of different stories about Phoenix Mart, and I won't try to bore you with all of them, but at the end of the day, there's about 1,700 vendors in the building. And projected, we just got an updated economic study from them about 6 months ago. The estimated employment for the Phoenix Mart project is 7,900. And if you, in the economic development business, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, there's always a multiplier that they apply to every job. And so if you apply a multiplier of 1.5, which is certainly not outside the realm of possibility, and these are indirect jobs, jobs that will be created because of the money coming into the community, adds up to a little over 10,000 jobs total that the Phoenix Mart will bring to our local economy. One of the questions I always get is where the workers going to come from. You know, we're a town of about 50,000, so our workforce is probably 20,000 plus or minus. Our unemployment rate right now is probably about 8%, but because the arithmetic is easier at 10%, tells me we probably have a couple thousand people that are looking for a job. Out of that couple thousand people looking for a job, there's probably half of those that don't want one. Well, you know, I'm being realistic, you know. So how are we going to make up the other 6,500 people that Phoenix Mart hopes to employ? And certainly part of that answer is we always work off of a regional system. People here in Casa Grande, a lot of them work in Coolidge, a lot of them work in Eloy, North Tucson, East Valley, and Phoenix. So our market territory for for employee base, we usually use a 30-mile radius, and that picks up most of Chandler, a little bit of Gilbert, a little bit of Scottsdale, all of Southeast Phoenix, a little bit of North Tucson. So there's probably 1.5 million people in that radius. So we will see an influx of people, I think, that will come to work down here. And again, that's healthy for us because it'll help drive things like hotels, gas stations, restaurants, and even our retail system. So I'm going to spend some time after I go through the updates and talk about this whole economic development concept, but Phoenix Mart by far will be a huge driver, and I think, and I'm sure you've all heard it, you know, this week they're coming, this week they're not coming. They've kind of stumbled into some things that they shouldn't have done. They had a groundbreaking 8 months ago, and I remember talking to them at the time saying, you know, don't do a groundbreaking and then go dark for 6 months. And they felt like they could get through some of their process issues quicker than they could. It didn't happen, but they are underway out there on the job as we speak. They expect to go from the entryway into grading the remainder of the 500 acres they own out there as soon as they finish that entry statement, and then start going vertical on the building. Some of the city projects that we're working on, I want to give you updates on. We recently completed a project to enlarge the downtown library. We get about 20,000 visitors a year in the library. I don't know how many of you have library cards, but the library business is changing, going more and more towards electronic. So much of the expansion that we've done in the library is geared towards computer use, electronic readers, those kind of things. There will also be a small coffee shop that hopefully will be opening by the end of the summer in the library, so you can, much like you do at Barnes and Noble, some of the bookstores, you can go grab a book and go have a cup of coffee and sit and enjoy the winter sunshine here in Casa Grande. Combined with that project, we also updated our dispatch center. Hopefully none of you have ever had occasion to go into the old police station, but when we built the new one, the expectation was that we would update the old station downtown as a regional dispatch center. We dispatch our police and fire out of there today, and I would never say this out loud publicly, but it was not a very good work environment. So we've gone in, enlarged it, we've created space to expand it. I think down the road, certainly if our neighbors are willing, we may even start talking to some of them about doing regional dispatch for more than just Casa Grande Police and Fire. And I think that's good for all of the taxpayers because it helps all of us. It helps defray our costs. Other communities that want to join us, it helps them save some money so they don't have to have that dispatch operation. And there is probably no more stressful job than a dispatcher. And high burnout rate for dispatchers, they're hard to find, so if we can combine that resource here in Casa Grande, that's a great thing. That project just, we haven't taken occupancy yet from the contractor, but we expect that to happen within the next couple of weeks. Our community center, little history on the community center. About 8 or 9 years ago, we went out to the voters with a whole series of bond issue concepts. The new police station was one of them. The new fire station was one of them. The joint use library with the high school at Casa Grande was one of those projects. We've now completed every one of those projects except a proposed community center. We have for about, we did an economic study about 2 years ago on that project. And while I think I speak for the entire council, we would all love to see that happen. Economic times being what they are, there's a deficit that they always operate at. And we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we build a building and then find out we can't afford to operate it. So we started into negotiation with the YMCA of the Valley as a nonprofit third-party partner and had reached a tentative agreement with them where they would operate it for us. We would not have to pay a deficit to pay for that operating cost. And about 2 weeks before we were ready to bring that agreement to the council, the YMCA, the executive director and chief financial officer both retired. And in the regrouping process, YMCA of the Valley decided that they had expanded into too many of these public-private partnerships too quickly and kind of pulled the plug on the deal. So we are looking now to see if there is another third party out there that we could contract with. I know the council all wants to see the project get started, but again, we don't want to build something that we can't afford to operate. And depending upon which study you looked at and what experience you look at, that deficit to operate that community center is somewhere between $500,000 a year and $1.5 million a year. So the good news is, I guess, the YMCA had their realization of expansion before we signed a document and started construction. The bad news is that while we spent a lot of time and energy trying to work through the agreement with them, at the end of the day, we couldn't get there. A couple of road projects we're working on. I talked in my State of the City about the Courtson Road interchange on I-10, and I certainly get a lot of people that ask the question, well, why don't you put the interchange on Cottonwood Lane instead of Courtson, because Cottonwood is the back entrance into the mall. There is a rural interstate standard with the Federal Highway Administration that says you have to have 2-mile spacing on your interchanges, and we are still considered a rural environment in Casa Grande. So we've got one at Florence Boulevard. Cottonwood Lane is a mile away. That doesn't meet the FHWA standard. The next standard would be Courtson Road. And we started a project about a year ago to do a preliminary design on the interchange because we've had a lot of interest from land developers to develop the 4 quadrants of what will eventually be that interchange. Happy to say we're almost done with that study. In technical terms, it's about a 30% design stage for the interchange. We are trying to accelerate a piece of that because if there are federal stimulus funds that become available, we want to have the opportunity to be considered as a project for Arizona with the Courtson interchange. As a corollary to that, we also have another proposed interchange out on what would be the Hennis Road alignment in I-8. Similarly, with the Courtson Road interchange, we've been working with the landowner, Mr. George Chassie, to try to move that project along. And you can't imagine the amount of, let's see, try to think of a good word for it. I don't want to call it bureaucratic red tape. the time that it takes to get through the federal process. Is that a fair statement, to get these projects underway? And again, the expectation is, while it's not a funded project right now, if we can get it far enough along in the design stage and federal stimulus dollars become available, that may be an opportunity for us to build the interchange. Why that's important to our community, that is the future economic hub of the community. Most of it's zoned industrial of one type or another, and certainly working with George over the last 10 or 12 years, the expectation is that's the entryway into our community, and we want to make it look nice and have a nice industrial park, and the interchange would really facilitate that happening much quicker than any of the other things that we might be able to do. We also are starting to see some movement on the housing front. I'm sure all of you have driven around and you've seen some of these subdivisions that were started and not finished during the boom time. We just recently approved a re-subdivision of the development that's across the street from Casa Grande Union High School. It's on the northeast corner of Treckle Road and McCartney. The builder has broken it up into smaller pieces so that he's not building 300 homes in a year, but he's anxious to get started. He thinks that it's a growing market, and that kind of dovetails with what we're seeing on the home building front. We're at a rate right now where we should do between 200 and 250 new dwelling units for the calendar year of 2014. And that's up at the low, we were below 100. At the peak back in 06, 07, we were doing about 200 a month. Somewhere between 150 and a year and 2,000 a year is probably a good comfortable number for us to grow at. I don't think any of us really want to get back to the 2,000 number. So in my mind, something in the 350 to 400 units a year allows us to grow at a rate that we can bring jobs along with those homes, and so we're not dependent necessarily on just home building to drive our economy. We also have seen proposed expansion. If you know where Village at Mary T is, on the not quite on the northeast corner of Peart and Cottonwood, they've come in with an expansion for a second phase of their project that will fill in that empty lot just to the west of the Village at Mary T, right on the corner. One of the components in it, which I think is probably very needed in town, there will be an assisted living component and an adult daycare facility there. And if any of you are dealing with parents who are not able to take care of themselves anymore, perhaps have Alzheimer's or dementia, this will be an alternative place for them to go during the day, so that if you have to work, you can go about your business as well. I think they're hoping to break ground sometime this summer. We also have a new restaurant coming in, and no, it's not Red Lobster, which is one of the other questions I get all the time. But it is a well-known chain. They're looking to go on Florence Boulevard, and they're looking both east and west of I-10. I think they're pretty anxious to come, and I think you'll probably start hearing more about who they are and what they are over the next couple of months. But it'd be a great addition to town. While I'm not at liberty to tell you who they are, I will tell you that they do have a bowl game named after them, so you can figure it out yourself. I talked a little bit at my State of the City about I-11. I-11 I still think is a very vital component. I think over the last couple of months, I've always been worried there's a lot of interest in I-11 between Phoenix and Las Vegas. I think in the last couple of months we've really stepped up our game in southern Arizona, and that includes Tucson, and now there's much more discussion about completing the loop from Buckeye down to Nogales. And for us in Casa Grande, that's hugely important because it would eliminate about 40 minutes of drive time going through downtown Phoenix for freight. Don't know that it will happen. I know it won't happen in my term in office, but hopefully it'll happen within the next 10 years or so. We'll start seeing some of those pieces coming together. Just as a sidelight, interesting fact, we were at a public meeting 2 weeks ago on I-11, and they were talking about the cost to do the environmental study for I-11 from Nogales to Las Vegas, and expected will take 4 years and cost $60 million. That's just for the environmental study. That's one of the reasons why it takes so long to get federal projects up and running. I spent the morning today talking with a prospect that was just recently announced in the paper. It's a company called Tractor Supply Company. They're headquartered out of Memphis, Tennessee. We are one of 2 finalists, and we are the preferred site for a new distribution center here in Casa Grande. They'll employ 250 people to start. Their expectation is that they will grow to a workforce of about 500 people within 3 years. Initial phase is 600,000 square feet of warehouse distribution space, growing to over $1.5 million within that 3-year time period. It's a great prospect for us. We always would wish that the pay scale in these companies was higher than they tend to be, but whether we like it or not, that really is where our workforce is. They want to break ground in September of this year, and they also have a retail component that goes along with that, and I know they are currently looking at Casa Grande for the retail component as well. Tractor Supply is one of the fastest growing retailers in the United States. They want to build 200 new stores in the next year across the country. The distribution center being proposed in Casa Grande would serve pieces of Southern California, Arizona, Southern Nevada, Southern Arizona, or Southern Utah, New Mexico, and maybe a little piece of West Texas. And as we look at economic development issues, our competition typically, we always compete really well with other communities inside of Arizona. Our competition is Utah, Nevada, Texas, to a lesser degree, New Mexico and Utah. And listening to the site selector this morning, we ought to be glad that we were able to do what we did, because the cost of doing business in Arizona for a private company, he's telling us the difference between us and the other site, which is in Utah, is about $900,000 a year. And it's nothing the city of Casa Grande can do anything about. It's a state issue. They have applied for what's known as foreign trade zone status, and that requires approval of all of the other taxing entities within Casa Grande. We've gone to the elementary school district, the high school district, the college district, the county. All have unanimously supported the foreign trade zone, and what it does is it gives the company a tax break for 20 years, property tax break. And it's really important, I think, that we understand that getting something is better than nothing, and their annual payroll for the first phase alone is a little over $9 million. It's a $90 million investment in the community. It will be located just south of here in the Central Arizona Commerce Park, which is west of Walmart, D.C. So, we're not there yet. We're in the home stretch, hopefully, in the next 2 weeks. I know we're probably going to have a special council meeting next week to approve a proposed agreement with them. We do have to get approval from the city of Phoenix for the foreign trade zone status. That's scheduled for the 17th or 18th of June. Every reason to think that that should happen. Once all those pieces fall in place, then we'll make the formal announcement and have a groundbreaking. But they're a very good company, very community oriented. They're publicly traded. They are a Fortune 500 company. They have a great benefit package for their employees. They require their management and supervisory employees to contribute a certain number of hours to community volunteer events. And I think at the end of the day, if we can make this happen, they'll be a great addition to our community. I think more importantly, if you've been out to the Central Arizona Commerce Park, there's a small building out there that's owned by the Casa Grande Dispatch newspapers. All the infrastructure's in place. He's just had trouble finding the right tenant to come in there. And in talking with a site selector this morning, Casa Grande is somewhat undiscovered. And he told us a story. He said when they first landed at Sky Harbor, they immediately went out to the West Valley and started looking out there for potential sites. And they really didn't find any that they liked. They found a site potentially in Buckeye, sat down with the city staff, and just didn't have the right chemistry. Kind of on a whim, they came back down here on a follow-up trip about 2 months later, and he'd been hearing all this stuff about Casa Grande. And they came down, looked at the site. They were surprised that they could actually get from Sky Harbor to Casa Grande faster than they could get from Sky Harbor to the West Valley during certain times of the day. And long story short, they sat down, we started talking to them. I think they appreciated the fact that unlike most municipalities, when we deal with our prospects, we try to go in and make sure we're prepared to answer all of their questions. With a 24-hour notice, we were able to bring all of the utility companies, all of our senior management staff, anybody who had anything to do with this project, together in a big room with the prospect and the site selector. And that apparently really impressed him, because today, over and over, he talked about the ability to have everybody come on the same page, get them together with a 24-hour notice, and deal not so much from a regulatory standpoint of you can't do this because, but hey, here's how we can help facilitate this to make it happen. And I think the learning I had coming out of there is we need to continue that aggressive, enthusiastic attitude for new industries in our town. And I hope that's something we never lose as we grow, because certainly the site selector we're dealing with today, he's working with 14 other active prospects across the country right now. He's got 2 of them that are looking at the Phoenix marketplace, and if we do a good job with Tractor Supply, I think we will see him again. He said as much today. He said, you know, hey, it's been a pleasure working with you guys, and I've got other clients that I will be bringing down here. So we're on the edge, I think, of maybe finally breaking out of this economic slump that has plagued us for the last 6 or 7 years, and I think that's really good news. I want to talk a little bit about why we do economic development, because certainly everybody has an attitude about it, some good, some not. I think our city council is fairly conservative about how we approach things, and I know many of you have heard me say this before, and I'm not saying this to be disparaging to our neighbors at all, but I don't think any of us really want to drive our economy on home building. I think Casa Grande is what it is today because we've been successful in bringing new industries and new jobs to town so people can live, work, and play in one location. I talked a little bit about Sam's Club earlier, and I'm sure many of you have had this conversation. We go up to Phoenix fairly regularly. We've got grandkids up there. But I get more people that tell me, if you had a Sam's Club or a Costco here in town, I'd never have to go to the Valley. When Judy and I were there yesterday afternoon, they were relatively busy on a weekday afternoon, and they're all people that I'm sure used to shop at either Costco or Sam's Club up in the Valley. So I think we want to maintain that sense of community as we grow. My belief is you do that by bringing industry in, getting jobs going, and then letting that drive your home building industry instead of having home builders come in, build homes that people drive to qualify in the house because they don't have any ownership in the community in which they live. And early in my career, I was one of those people. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I lived about 50 miles from where I worked, and I could never decide whether I wanted to invest my time in the community I worked in or the community I lived in. So I think if you can live, work, and play in the same place, it does give you more of a sense of community. And certainly, as I talk to other mayors around the state, we have a rare thing here in Casa Grande by being able to maintain that, even though the town has grown to 50,000 people. I think that don't want to devalue how important it is to have our existing industries grow as well. And I think that what we've tried to do in the city of Casa Grande is not only go out and look at new prospects like Tractor Supply, but also help companies that are already here to expand. I know that I was looking back at 2013 as a year, and we've been very successful with economic development. You know, we've seen the new Erman dairies over here on the west side of the property. They're up and running, hiring people. They're talking expansion already. We see Franklin Foods on the other side of the property. Again, they're up and running. I don't know that they're fully staffed yet, but they're trying to get to that level. Across the street, Hexcel just recently went through an expansion. They hired about 100 new people. And I think that those are all existing businesses here in town. Been here, some have been, Hexcel's one of the longest tenured industries in Casa Grande. And it's nice to see that they've liked the community enough that they want to reinvest their dollars in the products that they make here locally. You know, Sam's Club, ironically, we were out there last week for their groundbreaking. They're employing about 200 people out there as well. So you start looking at 200 here, 150 there, 50 over here. ACO Polymers down at the Airport Industrial Park expanded last year and added about 40 employees. All those things help drive our local economy. And like I said, hopefully, if you live, work, and play in the same place, we'll get people that are committed to making our community a better place. Talk a little bit about the site selection process, because the gentleman we met with this morning for 3 hours, he's a professional site selector. He's out of Memphis, Tennessee. He told us that they're worldwide in what they do, trying to help new businesses locate to new areas. And when you get on their radar screen, pays tremendous benefits to you. And I think that's why I was so encouraged coming out of that meeting this morning that, you know, we have done a good job of listening to what they need to be able to bring their business here, and at the same time be realistic about our ability to help them. And I think he very much appreciated that. And he said that the most important thing at the level, when we're in the final selection of the final two in our competition is St. George, Utah, what's really important is the ability to make decisions quickly and move them through the process as quickly as we can. And I think that before they got there, and he told us this story as well, you know, it's a big international company. They needed a location in the southwest part of the United States to come. He said everybody's initial look is they go look in California. And his more or less quote was, that's pretty short-lived. You know, California is not a good business climate. They do have a distribution center in California that they could have expanded, but felt like they were better off building a new one somewhere else. And again, our competition is California, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Utah, and Colorado. And of all those states, with the exception of California, because they have their own kind of set of rules over there, Arizona is at the bottom of the list as a state in attracting new industry. And he couldn't reinforce that enough in our discussions. And he said it's nothing the city does, it's a state issue. So, Mr. Shope, if there's a message there for you, you know, and I'm sure you've heard it before. But what it does in economic development circles, it really puts us at a competitive disadvantage with our neighbors, because if you can locate anywhere within a 500-mile radius, why come to Arizona if that's the poorest state to do business in? And again, I'm just reiterating what he said and what I've heard in other places. And so all the more reason why I think certainly our staff deserves a huge pat on the back for getting these guys in the door and getting them to the point that we're at now. So site selectors, when they start looking at places, they'll look at logistics. Problem we have in Casa Grande is that we're about 45 minutes too long to drive to LA. That's why they all like the West Valley. If I-11 comes in, or even the 202 loop comes in, and you can avoid the Broadway curve, that'll close that 45-minute to an hour drive time to a point where Casa Grande becomes much more attractive. And what we're hearing from site selectors is that we have the premier industrial park in Casa Grande at the Central Arizona Commerce Park, because it has all the infrastructure in place and it's railroad served. What's the tax climate and regulatory climate? I kind of beat that together. And TJ, I didn't really mean to pick on you, but since you're here, I'm sure you've heard it before. And then finally, one of the things you start looking at is the workforce. And I want to spend some time kind of talking about the workforce, because I think certainly as we looked at Tractor Supply, don't get me wrong, they're a great company, they're great jobs, there's benefits with them, but we want jobs that pay $20 an hour, not $13 or $14 an hour. And to get to that point, we need to make sure that we have a workforce that is capable of doing those kind of jobs. And we look regionally, site selection is going to look regionally. What does your workforce look like? And it's not just Casa Grande, it's Eloy, Coolidge, Florence, to some degree the bottom part of Chandler and Phoenix. And if we don't figure out how to make our students better prepared to be in that workforce, down the road, I think we in Casa Grande are going to be in trouble. And I think if there's anything that keeps me awake at night, it's that issue of, are we adequately preparing our young people to be the next generation of workers, so that when all of you are collecting Social Security, you want your kids and grandkids to be paying into it so that you can continue to be retired. So what does all that mean, I guess? And I think that if I were going to walk down the list of things that we need to work on in our community, I think more and more, we made a conscious decision about a year ago, and I know many of you that know me will know that I have always been one to say, hey, let's kind of do our little thing down here and do what we think is right for our community and grow our own, so to speak. I think with the mall, with the Phoenix Mart, with some of the things that are going on, we're way past that now. And what we're finding is that we need to go engage up in Metro Phoenix and let people know, hey, we're down here. We're the center of what's proposed to be the Sun Corridor megapolitan area. And it's a great place to live, work, play. We've got an available workforce. We have land. That word is getting out more and more in Phoenix. And we're finding more and more interest in coming down to Casa Grande to locate their businesses. And I think if we don't address this workforce problem, we're going to be in trouble, because healthy communities, at least in my opinion, you have to create more jobs and you have population coming in, because that'll keep you growing on a healthy rate. And I worry that if we don't have the adequate workforce, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we can't sustain the industrial growth that we need to keep the rest of the community growing. And that covers everything we do, quality of life. You look at criteria that site selectors use, and somewhere in the top 10 is a quality of life issue. What kind of fun activities do you have? The Phoenix Mart project, great example. I'm sure many of you heard the stories about the 300 Chinese investors that were investing in that $150 million project. Reality is most of those 300 families are probably going to live up in Scottsdale and Paradise Valley. And they'll come down here once a week, once a month, whatever they need to check the investment. If you ask them, why don't you want to come to Casa Grande? It's partly because of the amenities that we don't have that big cities do have. And that's a two-edged sword. It would be nice to have millionaires and billionaires living in our town spending their money here. It would be nice for our population to be able to have some of those recreational activities that we all drive to the valley for now because they're not offered here. But we've got to get to the point where we can be big enough and have enough people that we can sustain those kinds of things. And we're seeing those come in. The mall was huge. We look at things like our golf courses. Also, one of those activities that companies look at, whether you like it or not. The hiking trails at CG Mountain, all very important in looking at quality of life issues. I was recently reading a book, and I'll give credit to the guy because it was a great book, and if you have the time and the inclination, I'd recommend you all go out and maybe buy it online and read it. But it's called When Baby Boomers Bail, and it's by a guy named Mark Lautman. Mr. Lautman is a long-time economic developer out of New Mexico and helped turn around some of the Albuquerque, New Mexico things going on 20 years ago. And he has something that he calls a community economic death spiral. And I printed off the quote because I really liked it, and if you bear with me here, I'm going to read it for you. It says, a community death spiral is caused by two things: economic starvation and demographic starvation. Economic starvation results when a community's population is deprived of the economic-based jobs and investment needed to sustain itself. Demographic starvation occurs when a community cannot field enough qualified workers to staff its economic base. The result is the same economic death spiral. And I talk about education, and that's exactly why we need to worry about that. Because if we are going to sustain Casa Grande long term as a viable community, we need to make sure we have a good workforce coming up, not only in the generations that are here today, but the generations tomorrow and the next year. Because if we don't do that, you're going to slowly see Casa Grande fade into the woodwork. Because what's happened with all the baby boomers retiring, our workforce is declining. So there's going to be more and more competition for those people to come and live in your town. And every town on the horizon wants those 25 to 40-year-old young professionals to come and live in their town. Ask yourself the question today, why do they want to come to Casa Grande? Because that's the group we need to get to be able to sustain ourselves. And I believe we're going to get there by bringing good jobs to the community. And Tractor Supply is a good start. Again, Fortune 500 company. Nice to have that presence in our community. So I just think that we really need to focus on where we want to get to, what we want to do, and I think that we certainly have the tools in place to do that. With both the yogurt and the cream cheese plant, when they came to town, the reason they picked Casa Grande over Buckeye, we had infrastructure in place. We are constantly looking at upgrading our infrastructure to make sure that we stay ahead of that curve. We recently expanded our wastewater treatment plant. That was the single biggest issue to have both those companies locate here. Treatment plants expansions take 5 years. So if you backtrack 6 years, because we've been in operation for a year now, that means we started that expansion process, and that's the preliminary planning and permitting and design and construction and all that stuff, 6 years ago. And 6 years ago was 2008. What happened in 2008? The economy kind of went in a nosedive. So we think we're well prepared here. If we can overcome the workforce issue, I think we'll be fine. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but I after listening to the site selector this morning, I'm a little more worried about it than I was 2 weeks ago, because I think that if we're successful in landing the Tractor Supply Company, we're going to see a whole series of similar kinds of distribution centers wanting to relocate in Casa Grande, Arizona. So probably preached more than I wanted to about economic development. I hope that the updates on some of the projects that we've talked about in the past have helped. Certainly, again, the biggest one is the Phoenix Mart project, and I will tell you, I understand how frustrating it is. Everybody wants to see him come here. But I will also caution everybody about Phoenix Mart. Tremendous opportunity for us. It opens up international doors that we would never have seen otherwise. But it's only as good as you want to make it. There's opportunities for everybody in this room if you take them, but you can't just sit there and wait for them to come to you. If you have any interest in global economy, you need to get on their website. You need to understand what they do, how they do it. You need to figure out what your niche in that is going to be, because as we move forward in the United States, more and more of the world is becoming a consumer economy, and we make the best products in the world. So we need to figure out how we can market them in foreign markets. In Arizona in particular, we have the ability to be at the crossroads of the Canamex corridor connecting Mexico and Canada, and the only all-weather freeway system on I-10 that crosses the country. So get out your pencils and think about what you can do to not let them bring the jobs to you, but what idea do you have that you can pose to them and become part of that global economy. And I think we can really make Casa Grande, make our mark in the state of Arizona. So with that, thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Helen, for allowing me to speak. And if you have questions, I'll be here for a while. Come on up and talk to me. Thank you.